And we learned to be good pioneers. This is a picture of me being an honored pioneer. I was the president of my school and really enjoyed being a pioneer. You see, I learned the best that communism had to offer. There is so much in there that I didn't know as a child. I didn't know of the arrests, of the tortures, of the killings. But I learned that all people are brothers. At least if you're workers, you are brothers. I had a chance to meet a lot of students from Africa who have come to Hungary. And so there were many good things the way I could see it. And my parents never dared to speak about the other side of the situation. We learned not to see things, not to hear things, and definitely not to speak about things. Speaking was very dangerous. If I, as a young student, would have said some of the things that my parents did, for example, listening to Radio Free Europe was a real sin, my parents would have been immediately arrested. So you couldn't trust anybody. You couldn't even trust members of your own family. Some of my family members became devout communists. My father never could. He was called a reactionary. So we lived like this until October 23rd, 1956, when the Hungarian Revolution broke out. I was 12 years old at the time. The revolution did not last very long, but it was very, very bitter, and many of the young people lost their lives in it. It was standing up to, to the communist forces and standing up to Moscow, which was, it took a lot of courage in order to do that. And at first it seemed like that we would be winning. I was there building barricades and my father was there. But then the Soviet tanks came back full force and we lost the revolution. The failed illusions. So, because my father was arrested just before this and kept in prison for a week or so, and we didn't know where he was taken, and he was tortured. Luckily, he was returned, but we realized that next time he will not be so lucky. So we decided very quickly with thousands of other Hungarians that we got to leave the country. For a few days or a few weeks, the borders were open because normally you couldn't go out of Hungary because of all the mines around the borders. So the borders were opened and thousands of Hungarians, including us, streamed through the borders. As we were coming, we walked all night long, and as we were coming close to Austria, there was a river separating Austria from Hungary, and the bridge was blown away. So we stood on a plank, one by one. Somebody swam over. Now, this was in the middle of winter, and pulled us one by one from Hungary to Austria. We arrived to Austria, and we were desperately tired. It is even difficult to imagine how tired and confused we were, but Austria treated us extremely well as refugees. We stayed 4 months in various refugee camps, and we became targets of extreme anti-Semitism from fellow Christian Hungarian refugees. All this was new to me. I did not realize that I was Jewish, and suddenly I didn't realize that there were Jewish Hungarians and Christian Hungarians. I have learned that in the camps. For example, when we got to a particular camp, it was the Hungarians who had overturned our buses because here were the Jewish Hungarians coming. So this was one of the really difficult times, difficult areas to come to terms with, how our own people became actually our enemies. Here, after 4 months, Canada decided to take us in, and here is the boat called the Ascania, which came from Italy to Canada. Now, this was during the winter, and it was a very difficult trip where we were sick most of the time. And we arrived to Canada. It's just like the refugees today. We had absolutely no money. We had a suitcase full of clothes that we got in the camps, and we didn't speak the language. And so I can truly understand what people are feeling when you cannot communicate with others. They put us on a long train. First of all, we were put in Halifax in an old prison. Then they put us on a long train that dropped people off in different cities. Nobody knew where you would be dropped off. Winnipeg didn't want any refugees, so passed by, and we happened to be dropped off in Calgary, where we stayed for a few months, and then we went to Vancouver. Now, once again, we picked up life very quickly. My parents were very positive and very resourceful. My mother started sewing, and my father started selling without any English. He did really, really well. And life went on. But then my father announced that we're moving to Toronto from Vancouver, just as I started making friends and getting used to Vancouver. Then once again, we had to move. So that's where I have started the dark nights of my soul. I kept it together really well, but then I had a minor accident in the gym, and I didn't get better. And I was admitted to hospital, and I hurt my stomach, but there was really no medical reason for what I was feeling. But what was interesting, that nobody has asked me, what is going on with you? Tell me a little bit about your story. I had a Hungarian doctor who came very dutifully for 5 minutes every day to find out how I was doing, but never asked me, what experiences did you have? So the high school years were very difficult, and that's where this dark night of the soul really has hit me. And I was trying to find models that I can model my life after. I was looking for religion. It was interesting, but I still remember going to so many churches, trying to find out what they had to offer. And they very kindly explained to me that this is the church that has the truth. The church down the street is similar, but they don't have the truth. The only interesting commonality was the Jews. Get away from them. Don't go close to them. They certainly don't have the truth. So as a child, I was totally confused. How can the same Christ that everyone reveres in the Christian churches be so different and not respect one another. So I wasn't able to choose at that time. My models became Martin Luther King, Dr. Tom Dooley, Dr. Norman Bethune, Florence Nightingale, Mother Teresa. These were the people that I have admired, but I didn't know them very well. I was maybe about 14, 15 years old at that time. When I finished high school, I went to Montreal, to university. That's when I got to McGill, and life has again changed. I was beginning to realize that I had number of choices, and I am in charge of my destiny. I could choose. So while in Montreal, after much searching, I found my spiritual path. I was 19 years old at the time, and that's when I found the Baha'i faith. I studied the faith very, very carefully, and it was mostly with my head that I have accepted the faith. Because when you have no religion at all, sometimes the heart isn't open. But my head was open, and I loved the social teachings. And also I loved the fact that the Baha'i faith accepted everybody. There was no difference made because of your previous religion or because of your race. And when I shared with them, my background is Jewish, was not a problem. So I became a Baha'i at 19, and also at that time, my husband and I have met. Now, we were racially very different. And in 1956, by that time it was in the 1964 when we met, blacks and whites did not think about relationships or marriages. But because we were part of the Baha'i community, and we were very encouraged that mixing of the races is really a wonderful idea, we got a lot of support. And then we had to convince our parents that this is really a good idea and we know what we're doing, and that took another 6 months until we finally managed to get the letter of consent. But we did get it, and we had a beautiful ceremony in the Baha'i shrine in Montreal. So then the next couple of years, we had our children. We adopted 3 of the boys we adopted, and 2 of the girls we gave birth to. And then all of us, the 7 of us, went off to Nigeria for 2 years to teach at the University of Nigeria. So then, the second Baha'i World Congress in 1992 was advertised to happen. And I went back to my old dream and decided that this would be the time to do my transformational work. And I gave myself 4 whole weeks. I thought I could complete it. Well, I wasn't right, but I have made a wonderful start. Now, the World Congress, any of you here had a chance to be at the World Congress? Oh yeah, quite a few of you. It was an amazing affair in New York City. There were 30,000 Baha'is who traveled from every corner of the world to participate in the World Congress. And my plan was, I am going to learn how to cross my desert. So I made this itinerary. I was going to go to Germany first, after the World Congress. Now, for Jews, had very strong feelings and very strong fear about entering to Germany. So that was the first hurdle to overcome. Then I was going to go to Auschwitz and see what happened there. Then I was going to go back to Hungary, to Budapest, to do some of my work over there, and then go to the holy places in Israel to try and understand and integrate everything. So the 4 weeks were very full, and I asked my dear friend, who is a psychologist, to come with me. And it was a tourist trip for her, but for me, it was a transformational journey. The Universal House of Justice advertised this conference that this is a special time for a rendezvous of the soul with the source of its light and guidance. This is the time to retreat to one's innermost being. This is exactly what I was intending to do. So, this was the World Congress, which was an amazing, amazing high. And then I flew to Germany. And the first place in Germany where I went is the Bahai temple in Langenheim. I figured I should start with something spiritual to make this trip easier. And it was amazing getting into the airport. This was my first time in Germany. A lot of fear, a lot of anxiety. But I figured it's not written on my forehead that I am Jewish. I'm sure nobody cares. And so slowly I started to relax. And that has helped me to eventually explore the country, but also to find my way to the temple. Then in Prague, we went to see the museum, the Terezin Museum, which was a model concentration camp where there were actually 15,000 children that were taken to this camp, but only 100 survived. They didn't kill anybody in the Terezin camp, but they have taken them to Auschwitz later on, and that's where the killing has happened. This place was filled with children's art, talking about the times before the war and the times during the war. It was very, very poignant. And then from there, spent almost a day in Auschwitz and Birkenau. And that was a very, very difficult trip. Did anyone here had a chance to visit those places? Not yet, huh? It was very good that I went because I was able to really see exactly what has happened. What you see here is the ovens where, when people were dead already, they were put in these ovens and then carried in these carts. And here, there was a place called Canada, of all names, where the new prisoners were stripped of all their belongings. So you see thousands and thousands of luggage, of clothes, of gold teeth, of hair. Everything that could be stripped was stripped. On the gate, there was a big sign, "Work makes you free." And I was reading one of Judy Chicago's books with a lot of her art as to what exactly does that mean. And then at one place, we were standing there, and there was all kinds of plants growing on the ground. And what was discovered, that was the place where a lot of people's ashes were buried. And so all the life around Auschwitz came from the ashes of the people who had been murdered there. It was extremely difficult to go through these places. I couldn't even keep with my friend. I separated because I just needed to be alone. The wall of indifference, it seemed like countries turned their back to what was happening to the Jewish population. Here you have a restaurant where people are having a good time, and yet over here people are marched into the gas chambers. Again, total indifference. What would you have done? I often wondered, what would I have done? Because there were many people who were hiding Jewish families, Christian families who were protecting Jewish families. And if they were discovered, they too could be killed. So it's quite a decision to make whether you're ready to give your life in order to protect another family. Then I went back to Budapest, back to where the Jewish ghetto was, and did some work there. But I also did another piece of work, because during the Hungarian Revolution, our apartment got a bomb hit, and there was a gaping hole in the ceiling. And somehow, I don't remember how, but I went away from home, went on a very long walk, and I remember seeing people hanging in the streets and horror scenes, but everything was deserted. There was no live people around. And I don't remember how I got back. So my friend and I tried to recreate this journey and walk through the same place, and ended up at the home of my great-grandparents that I was so close to. Now, what I realized, and a lot of this work was actually hypnotic work, which I have often done with clients, but I did it now with myself. What I realized is that that very scared child that was me during that time, I left there. I could not cope with being scared, so I didn't need that part of me. And when I went back, there was a real little girl about the same age living in that house. So I have re-owned that inner child part of me that I have left and cut off from myself. I don't know if you understand what this means about re-owning parts of you that you cut off, because we do cut off certain parts that you feel is no longer useful. Then we went back to visit all the refugee camps, or at least as many as I could think of, that we have been, or I have been. And it's interesting, when visiting some of these camps, the physical body pain have come back. And I knew that I was safe now, and yet the body held those memories of what was happening way back then. And then in Salzburg, that's where I left the communist child, the good pioneer who still had some faith in communism, because I knew that that child could not be accepted again in Canada. And the final cutoff point was the Jewish child that I left on the boat, and I swore that nobody would know about my Jewish background, and I kept that actually for 35 years. I never mentioned my Jewish background. There was an incident at the boat which was filled with Hungarian refugees, where one night they were going to throw all the Jewish refugees into the sea. And I was terrified. I didn't realize at that time that they arrested the people who were hatching this plot. I was really scared, and I don't even remember that night. It's totally cut out of my memory. But I figured that no, that Jewish child just cannot come to Canada. So this was the experience in Europe, and then my friend and I went to Israel, and at first we had to see the Yad Vashem, the Holocaust memorial in Jerusalem. And that was quite something also to see. Now, after Auschwitz, nothing was that difficult, but yet it was an amazing experience to go through there. Here is Korsak with the children. Korsak was a medical doctor in Prague who was taken to Auschwitz with all of his children, even though he had a chance to escape, but he didn't want to leave the children. And then it was time to put it all together and go to the shrines and see if I can get some answers to my questions. So many of you are familiar with some of these pictures. I am almost finished. The Shrine of Baha'u'llah has always been my safe place. I've been there a couple of times before this time, and that's where I was heading. I was hoping that I can get the answers to my questions. And to the right of the shrine, that's where Baha'u'llah is buried, and it's covered with rose petals. So I sat in the shrine for, I think it must have been a couple of hours. And while I was praying and meditating, a vision comes to me and guidance for the future. Abdu'l-Baha, I also asked him to guide me and be with me, and my goodness, he was. I could feel his presence, especially when I was going through Auschwitz. I was ready to turn back. We took the train to Auschwitz, and I didn't want to go. And I felt a hand on my shoulder saying, "You got to go." And I didn't dare to turn back then. But Abdu'l-Baha now wanted me to go back to Auschwitz, in my mind this time, to answer the question, how could God allow such atrocities to take place?